Good morning and welcome to the Grim. I'm your host, Kristen. On today's episode, we'll be opening the gate and entering El Campo Santo Cemetery, located in San Diego, California. So grab your favorite mug, cozy up, and let's take a dig into history. Choosing cemeteries for the grim at times can be a daunting task. You have to ask yourself, does it have the history, the notable souls resting there, the tragic stories, or better yet, a few hauntings to seal the deal? And honestly, as winter continues to grip the north with its icy fingers, I can't blame anyone for wanting a final resting place somewhere a little warmer. California, with its beaches, palm trees, and generally nicer weather, feels like the perfect escape from the Grimm's cold and dreary hometown right now. This makes San Diego the ideal destination for this week's episode. Most people think of San Diego for its sunshine and laid back vibes, but let me tell you, if you're overlooking its haunted side, you're seriously missing out. This place is absolutely packed with paranormal energy, and the Grim is here to make sure you don't sleep on it. Of course, unless it's your final resting place. El Campo Santo Cemetery in San Diego's Old Town is a haunting reminder of a city that prioritized modernization over respect for its dead. What visitors see today is only a fragment of what once was in the cemetery. Over time, sidewalks, roads, and even nearby restaurants have been built directly over the graves of its residents, a stark testament to how little consideration was given to preserving their final resting place. Digging into its history, you begin to see the full picture, though. San Diego quite literally paved over the past, erasing lives and stories in the name of progress. It's a black mark on the city's treatment of its own history, a chilling example of what happens when the dead are forgotten. When TripAdvisor Review called it a quaint but shabby cemetery, but honestly, I think El Campo Santo proves how important it truly is to understand the history of a place before passing judgment. If you don't know what the stories beneath your feet, you might not realize just how much has been lost or why the grounds are quaint but shabby today. So let's take a step back and dig into El Campo Santo's past to fully understand what we're seeing today and what its future holds. Established in 1849 as a Catholic cemetery, it was meant to be a sacred resting place for San Diego's early residents, including pioneers, politicians, indigenous people, and even criminals like the infamous Yankee John Robinson, whose execution near the Whaley House still fuels ghost stories to this day, but more on that later. El Campo Santo once encompassed the Adobe Chapel on Conde Street, where notable early San Diegoans, including José Antonio Aguirre, María Victoria Domínguez Estudillo, and Cave Johnson Couts, were laid to rest. Nestled in Old Town San Diego Historic Park, only 477 marked graves are supposedly known today. But that number barely scratches the surface of how many souls were originally laid here to rest. So, what happened? San Diego was booming, and as the city expanded, progress took priority over preservation. By the late 1880s, El Campo Santo found itself literally in the way of San Diego's growing infrastructure. The demand for roads and a horse drawn streetcar route outweighed the need to respect the dead. Tracks were laid right through the cemetery, later evolving into the modern roadway we know today as San Diego Avenue, paving over countless graves. A replica bell from the old Camino Real streetcar route sits outside the entrance, a small historical nod to this transition. Linwood Street, that also flanks the cemetery, is known to have grave sites under its pavement, but unlike San Diego Avenue, it's bare with no markers. Those laid to rest there were swallowed by time, erased from history, their voices muffled beneath the weight of progress. With headstones removed and burial plots forgotten, hundreds of souls now lie beneath the sidewalks and streets, their stories buried just as deeply as the remains. Today, only a small section of the original cemetery remains, enclosed by a brick wall erected in 1933, a late attempt at restoration. The grave markers we see today are all replicas practically, painstakingly recreated that same year, except for about one or two originals. To further uncover the resting places, ground penetrating radar was eventually employed, marking grave sites that would have otherwise been forgotten. Yet many graves are only denoted within by small round metal markers, bearing numbers, no names, no history. The graves extend beyond the wall, buried beneath the surrounding sidewalks of streets and even nearby businesses. In an attempt to acknowledge this, the city later embedded small round brass markers into the pavement, indicating the locations of some of these forgotten graves. Inscribed with gravesite, these markers can be found in the sidewalk and road, but many more remain unmarked, their occupants still lost. This serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of prioritizing modernization over preservation. It's a silent erasure of history, buried beneath our feet, unnoticed by those walking above. Many may stroll past these markers without a second thought, blissfully unaware of what's beneath them, the dead still at rest. In fact, some might even find themselves dining al fresco at a nearby restaurant, completely unaware that they're seated atop a gravesite. This is why at the Grim we encourage listeners to appreciate, respectively visit, and support their local cemeteries today to ensure that the lessons of the past aren't buried in the march of progress. Perhaps that's why El Campo Santo is one of San Diego's most haunted locations. Ghostly figures, flickering lights, cold spots, and mysterious car troubles all plague those who pass through here. The dead simply are not resting easy here. And who could blame them? The cemetery stands as both a historical landmark and a warning of what happens when the past is carelessly paved over. The Grim knows all too well that some things refuse to stay buried. But who's within that we know of then? In the unforgiving landscape of the 19th century California, Jose Antonio Aguirre emerged as a formidable figure whose life was steeped in hardship and relentless ambition. Born in 1799 in San Sebastian, Spain, Aguero's early years were marked by displacement. At 15, he ventured to New Orleans, then only to be later expelled from Mexico due to his unwavering loyalty to Spain following Mexico's independence. This expulsion forced him to seek refuge in the tumultuous terrains of Alta California. As a merchant and ship owner, Aguero navigated treacherous waters, both literally and metaphorically. Operating vessels like the Briggs Leonidas and the Joven Guipuzcoana, he engaged in the perilous trade of hides and tallow, importing luxury goods that only the elite could afford. His warehouse at La Playa near San Diego stood as a testament to his relentless pursuit of wealth in a land rife with lawlessness and moral ambiguity. Aguero's ascent to power was further solidified through strategic land acquisitions and alliances. Aguero's ascent to power was further solidified through strategic land acquisitions and alliances. In 1843, he secured half the Mexican land grant for Rancho El Tejon, expanding his dominion to parts of Santa Cruz Island and Rancho San Pedro. His partnership in 1850 to William Heath Davis and Miguel Pedrorena aimed to develop Newtown San Diego, a venture that ultimately succumbed to the era's pervasive instability. Undeterred, Ogaro's influence permeated the region, his legacy etched into the very fabric of California's history. In his personal life, Aguero's choices reflected the harsh realities of the time. His marriages to both Maria Francisco Estullo and later her sister, Maria del Rosario Estullo, were not merely unions of affection, but strategic alliances designed to fortify his standing amidst the volatile social and political landscape. These relationships, while consolidating power, also tethered him to a world where loyalty was scarce, and trust was a luxury few could afford. Today, the remnants of Aguero's existence, such as the Casa de Aguero in Old Town San Diego's State Historic Park and the old adobe chapel he financed, serve as stark monuments to a man who thrived in an era where survival often necessitated moral compromise. Jose Antonio Aguero's life is a narrative steeped in the grim realities of ambition, power, and the relentless pursuits of a legacy in a world fraught with peril and uncertainty. Our next resident within is Maria Victoria Dominguez. Dominguez was born into privilege, her name woven into the very fabric of California's history. She was the daughter of one of the region's earliest landowning families, a link between the Spanish past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. In 1824, she wed Jose Antonio Estullo, emerging the two most powerful California dynasties. For 4 decades, she moved within the quiet authority through the shifting tides of San Diego's history, from the Spanish Brazil of her youth to the bustling Mexican Pueblo, and in the encroaching American city. Though history offers only fleeting glimpses of her, those who knew her spoke of her grace and charm, a woman of warmth who welcomed esteemed guests into her home. Traders, governors, and world travelers alike passed through her doors. Alfred Robinson, present for the blessing of her home in 1829. Governor Icacanda, drawn to San Diego by both the climate and his love for Josefa Carraro, and Du Hatzili, the Frenchman chronicling his grand tour through the world. Maria Victoria embodied hospitality, a pillar of a fading era. But time does not always honor the dead. Her final resting place, once solemnly marked at El Campo Santo, was paved over in the March of Progress, as we said, her grave reduced to a brass marker embedded in the pavement. Some say Maria Victoria's presence lingers. A spectral woman in white is seen drifting through the mist soaked cemetery at times. Her form barely discernible, her purpose, though unknown. Does she search for lost love, or simply the peace that was stripped away when the city built over the bones of the past? We may never know. In the mid 19th century, Cave Johnson Couts emerged as a prominent yet young contentious figure in Southern California's history. Born in 1821 near Springfield, Tennessee, Couts graduated from West Point in 1843 and was subsequently stationed in California. In 1851, he married Isidore Bandini, aligning himself with the influential Bandini family, yes, from that other episode of The Grimm, and received the expansive Rancho Cajon as a wedding gift. Where he established a prosperous ranching enterprise. However, Cow's success was marred by his exploration of indigenous labor. Appointed as a sub-agent for the San Luis Rey Indians in 1853, he utilized the 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Indians to bind Native Americans into servitude. His management style was notoriously severe, and he faced allegations of mistreatment and violence toward his workers. In one notable incident, Kautz was indicated for murder after fatally shooting a former employee during a dispute over wages. He sadly was acquitted, a verdict met with public approval at the time. Despite his wealth and status, Kaut's legacy is overshadowed by the controversial practices and moral implications of his actions during a turbulent period in California's history. He passed away on June 10th, 1874, in San Diego. Today, the Rancho Home Adobe, constructed between 1852 and 1853, stands as a testament to his complex legacy. The 7,000 square foot hacienda features 28 rooms and 2 courtyards, exemplifies Spanish Mexican colonial architecture. Recognized as a National Historic Landmark in 1970, the adobe now serves as a historic house museum within a 112-acre county park, offering a window into the region's multifaceted past. Ironically, the legacy of another resident stood in stark contrast to Couts, as this individual dedicated their entire life to fighting for indigenous rights. Antonio Guerra, a prominent leader of the Cupano people in the mid 19th century, Southern California, staunchly opposed the injustices imposed upon his community. Facing taxation without representation and the relentless encroachment upon ancestral lands, Guerra sought to unite various indigenous tribes in a concentrated effort to resist these operations. His resistance culminated in what is known as Guerra's Revolt, a series of coordinated actions aimed at reclaiming autonomy and rights for natives. However, this defiance was met with betrayal. Guerra was captured, subjected to a trial, and condemned to death. On January 10th, 1852, in San Diego, he faced execution. In his final moments, when asked for any last words, he addressed those present, saying, "Gentlemen, I ask for your pardon for all my offenses, and I expect yours in return." Today, the legacy of Antonio Guerra endures. Annually, Old Town San Diego State Historic Park commemorates his life and resistance during Antonio Guerra Day, honoring his enduring impact on Native American history and the ongoing struggle for justice and sovereignty. Some local legends suggest his spirit remains restless. Visitors to the area have reported unexplained phenomenon, with some attributing these experiences to Gauta's lingering presence, a testament to his enduring fight for justice. Some say on a silent night, a wail rises from the ground, not the cry of an animal, but the voice of a warrior, demanding for justice beyond the grave. You'd think if a cemetery holds a city's first mayor, it would hold quite the significance in a town. That obviously wasn't the case for El Campo Santo, which it does. Juan Maria Osuno was a man of duty, power, and loss, his wife intertwined with the shifting tides of San Diego's brutal past. Born to a soldier's life, he served in the San Diego Company, only to retire and carve his own path in the unforgiving frontier. His hands built one of the first homes beyond the safety of the Presidio walls, a fragile sanctuary in a world of blood and dust. In 1835, Osuna became San Diego's first mayor, a title that carried both prestige and peril. He oversaw a town that was more bones than civilization, tasked with maintaining order in a place where law was often a suggestion. When the land was divided, he was granted Rancho San Dieguito, a sprawling, untamed wilderness that would one day be tamed, but not in his lifetime. But then came war. When the Americans arrived in 1846, Osuna's loyalty to Mexico burned bright, but resistance was futile. Soldiers stormed his home, leaving ruin in their wake. Worse still, his son Santiago fell to the violence, another name lost to the land's insatiable hunger for the dead. Juan Maria Osuna did not live to see peace, though. He died in 1851 and was laid to rest in El Campo Santo Cemetery. Even now, visitors whisper of restless spirits among the graves. Perhaps Osuna himself, still watching over the city that betrayed him, is there. Between 1849 and 1897, nearly 500 souls were buried within this ground. But after 1874, their rest was disturbed with their graves exhumed and relocated to other graveyards or sites, making it hard to really know who's within Campo Santo. One story I haven't shared yet, though, is about one of the most infamous residents buried on the grounds. None other than Yankee Jim Robinson. Robinson's name is forever etched in the eerie history of San Diego, not for any acts of heroism, but for the sinister legacy he left behind. Known for his reckless behavior, drunken brawls, and crimes as a horse thief, Jim was a man the town had grown to despise. He was a troublemaker in every sense of the word, and by 1852 it seemed everyone was waiting for the perfect moment to rid themselves of him. That moment arrived when Jim, along with two accomplices, tried to steal the schooner Plutus. Jim later claimed that he only intended to borrow this ship, but no one believed him. The three men were quickly caught, and Jim, in the chaos of his capture, sustained a brutal head injury from a rusty sword. As he awaited trial, Jim's health deteriorated. His fever from the head injury made him weak and delirious. His two accomplices were sentenced to a mere year in prison, while Jim, the notorious drunk, thief, and troublemaker, was sentenced to hang. Strangely, Jim's official sentencing was recorded as horse theft, not for the attempted schooner theft. However, that detail seemed irrelevant to everyone involved. And so, on a day in 1852, Jim Robinson met his fate at the gallows, but the story doesn't end with his death. Legend has it that the very tree where Jim was hung stood on the land where the Whaley house would eventually be built. Some say that Thomas Whaley, the man who would later build the house, was even present to witness the execution. Since that fateful day, strange occurrences have been reported at the Whaley house. Over the years, people have claimed to feel a cold, lingering presence, one that seems to watch them with judgmental gaze. Some believe it's Yankee Jim, still restless in the afterlife, unable to move on from the place where he met his untimely end. Many believe Jim's burial in El Campo Santo fuels the strange occurrences within the graveyard, with an eerie energy flowing from the Whaley house just down the street. With the site of his execution only a block away from his final resting place, the connection between the two lingers, a chilling link for paranormal enthusiasts. If Yankee Jim wasn't a grim enough sordid tale for a cemetery, how about a double hanging on the grounds? In the tangled web of California's violent transition from Mexican to American control, the stories of William Marshall and Juan Verdugo have become cautionary tales of betrayal, misunderstanding, and unrelenting fate. These two men, whose lives ended in the harsh embrace of the gallows on December 13th, 1851, remain intertwined with one of the darkest chapters in the region's history, the Guerra Revolt. Though history paints Marshall as the villain, an instigator of violence and chaos, a deeper look reveals a more tragic story. A man caught between two cultures, fighting for survival in an era dominated by bloodshed and turmoil. And then there's Verdugo, a Californio whose fate became inextricably linked to Marshall's, swept along in a storm of revolution and revenge that would ultimately cost them both their lives. Born in Providence, Rhode Island around 1827, little is known of William Marshall's early life, but he arrived in San Diego in 1844, his journey shrouded in mystery. Some suggest he deserted a ship, the Hopewell, while others believe he was simply an adventurer, seeking the fortune and opportunities that California promised. Regardless, Marshall found his home in the burgeoning port town, where the rough and tumble life suited him perfectly. By 1846, Marshall had moved to Agua Caliente, modern day Warner Springs, a remote oasis known for its healing waters, where he became deeply integrated in the local Cupano Indian community. Here he married the daughter of Jose Narco, a respected Cupano leader, and began a life that seemed to promise stability amid the shifting tides of California's history. Little did he know this union would ultimately lead to his involvement in the events that would seal his tragic fate. Marshall is often linked to the Palma Massacre of December 1846, where a group of Californios were executed by the Luiseno Indians. Marshall's name had been dragged through the mud for his supposed role in inciting this brutal event, but the truth remains murky. While the earliest accounts of the massacre make no mention of Marshall, much later, in 1874, Juana Machado Rennington, a California woman, claimed Marshall was involved, suggesting he had encouraged the Luiseno to kill the prisoners. Yet her account was far from reliable, filled with contradictions and conflations. No contemporary records from the Guerra Revolt itself mentions the massacre, and many of the theories surrounding Marshall's motive, revenge over romantic rivalry, are based on pure speculation. In fact, the timeline doesn't support such theories, such as the woman in question had already married another man years before Marshall had arrived in California. These myths may have perpetuated the story, but the truth about Marshall's role remains elusive. In 1851, Marshall's life took a darker turn. The Guerra Revolt was sparked by Antonio Guerra, who we mentioned before. Marshall, living among the Cupanos at the time, found himself trapped in the violent uprising he never intended to join. On November 21st, 1851, Guerra's forces attacked Agua Caliente, killing four American men. Marshall and Verdugo were present during the attack, but both men claimed to have been coerced into joining the revolt under the threat of death. Marshall, in particular, insisted that he only sought to protect his family and himself. But despite his protests, the American authorities saw his ties to the Cupanos as treasonous, and both Marshall and Verdugo were captured and transported to San Diego for trial. The trial was swift and unforgiving, was a product of prejudice and fear surrounding the California's volatile political climate. Marshall and Verdugo were charged with high treason, murder, and robbery, charges that seemed more of a result of panic than actual evidence. Marshall's defense, claiming he had been forced to comply with the rebels, was ignored, and both men were sentenced to death by hanging. Marshall and Verdugo were executed on December 13th, 1851, their lives snuffed out on the gallows. To this day, the exact reasons for their deaths remain steeped in ambiguity. Was Marshall a villainous instigator, as history would have us believe? Or was he a man swept up in the tide of events far beyond his control, a victim of circumstances as much as his accusers? The stories of William Marshall and Juan Verdugo echo through California's history, forever tied to the Guerra Revolt and the struggles of Californios and Native Americans during the state's transition from Mexican to American rule. Both men were executed unjustly, though, their stories twisted and lost to time. El Campo Santo's grounds may appear unassuming at first glance, but with its rich history, eerie hauntings, and sordid tales, it makes it anything but quaint and shabby. The cemetery has been extensively documented by ghost hunters, paranormal enthusiasts, and through social media, finally receiving the attention it deserves centuries later. But for its permanent residents who've lingered far beyond their time limit, it's just another day in paradise. The grave grind for El Campo Santo Cemetery was a Lata Horchata from California Bean. For more honorary grinds in the area, please visit the-grim.com. For now, we're closing the gate on El Campo Santo Cemetery. We hope you enjoyed our dig into history. If you did, subscribe today to join us next time when we open the gate on the Grim.